Hi, I'm John Paul. A big warm welcome back to the channel. I'm just coming on here very quickly before the conversation with Caz and I starts, just to say a couple of things. One of the reasons Caz is coming on, which I explain or we talk about in the conversation, is that her book is out today. Her book about relational ethics and psychotherapy, and I think you'll really find the conversation interesting, hopefully. But we do mention it in there. This channel is talked about in the book in the context of social media and the kind of ethics around that. So that made me come on here really just to say thank you so much for everything, all the contributions that you make to this channel, whether that's liking something, whether that's sharing it, of course subscribing to the channel, watching the videos, and of course making comments. And people make really detailed comments, give some lovely feedback. So I really appreciate it. You know, there are things that obviously people find helpful moving along on their journey, but I just wanted to say it helps me too very much doing this channel generally, but also hearing from you in the way that a lot of people do. So please do keep commenting. But up until now, as I said, I really appreciate your input, your views, your likes, your shares, your subscribes, whatever it might be. Hugely appreciate it. So I just wanted to say that. I think you'll find the conversation with Caz really interesting. We cover all kinds of things, whether that's about kind of political awareness, social awareness. I haven't talked about that very much on the channel, setting up a private practice, money, generally ethics, which I have talked about a bit, but some more on that. She's very experienced, has a lot to say, and of course has this great book out as well. So I really hope you enjoy it. Just before the conversation starts, I just wanted to let you know what's also coming up on the channel. I'm currently enjoying thinking about a question that somebody's asked about what makes a good therapist. What they've said, somebody wrote in and put a comment under a video about they're not particularly a people person, they're quite introverted. How could I be a good therapist? And, they've said, does the training do that for you? So I'm going to answer that. I think it's a really interesting question, all about the kind of qualities that may be present and necessary, but also about the journey of training. Do we have to have those qualities present when we start training? So I'm going to talk all about that. As I said, I'm enjoying thinking about it, so I'll be recording that over the next week or two. Also, I will be interviewing or having a conversation with a trainee therapist called Lee Raspberry. I'm looking forward to that. He has just started his journey as far as training, so hopefully that's going to be interesting for people. In terms of trauma, I haven't really talked about it that much on the channel. I did talk about it with Lula Bentz. In terms of her career, I just put a link to the conversation that I had with her, and she is a trauma specialist, runs her own course training therapists on trauma treatments. So yes, we talked about it a bit there, but I have two people coming on separately onto the channel to talk about trauma. One of them is a guy called Mark Brain, who was a BBC journalist, very successful BBC journalist, who changed career to become a psychotherapist. Very chatty, really lovely guy, loads of experience, and he specialises in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is kind of very well known and effective trauma treatment. So he's going to come on and talk about that, which I think is going to be great. Also, a therapist called Philippa Smethurst. She has written a book on trauma, which is going to be published soon, about 20 ways to, I think it's overcome trauma. She's structured the book quite cleverly in that what she's done is identify sort of trauma symptoms. So for one person, it might be a lot of anger. For another person, it may be, more anxiety, the difficulties that it might bring in relationships. So all the different ways that trauma might manifest in people's experience of themselves and others. She structured the book in that way with, of course, ways through it as well. And I think she focuses on somatic therapy, which a lot of trauma therapists do. So she's coming on to talk about that, which will be great. I've hopefully got somebody coming on to talk about ecotherapy. It was mentioned in the video which I did with Richard Rogers, who trained as a therapist but then didn't continue. I'll put a link to that conversation as well. A lot about nature and gardening there. But we did touch on a bit ecotherapy, so I wanted to get somebody to come on and explain all of that. Might be interesting for you, might be something you'd be looking at doing if you became a therapist or as a client wanting to do ecotherapy. So that's coming up. And then also, just to finish off, because I've already been on here for a while, and of course you will be wanting to watch Caz, but just to say I've got somebody coming on to talk about career change as well. He's somebody that's come up with a model called a personal exit plan, I think it's called. So people who are in existing careers that they want to move out of, how do you put together a plan to help yourself to do that? And it's a sort of 7-stage plan, I think, from memory, but he's going to come on and just very briefly kind of talk through those steps, which I think is going to be very helpful for a lot of people on this channel. As I said, it's not specifically therapy related, but having this plan, having a structure, the kind of areas that you need to think about when making this transition, I think that's going to be helpful and interesting for a lot of people. So that's what's coming up that I know about. If you have any ideas about subjects that you want me to cover, please do write in by email. A lot of people do that, or make a comment below the video as well, and just let me know. As ever, please do like, share the video if you find it helpful. Also, please do subscribe if you haven't already. And here comes the video with Caz, which, as I say, I hope you'll find helpful. Do take care, and I shall see you again soon. I'm John Paul, and a really warm welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm so delighted to have Caz Binstead with me to have a conversation about various things. She's had and continues to have an amazing career, lots of aspects of which I think are of direct relevance to lots of the viewers and subscribers to this channel. Just to read Caz's bio, just so you get an idea of that. Caz Binstead is an experienced private practitioner, supervisor, writer, and facilitator, visiting lecturer. She's the first author on the forthcoming book, Relational Ethics in Psychotherapy and Counselling Private Practice, Solidarity, Compassion, Justice. Specialising in the growth and maintenance of ethical and thriving practice, she was instrumental in the creation of the Private Practice Toolkit at the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, the BACP, and acted as divisional lead on the project. Caz is also co-lead of the popular community platform, #TherapistConnect, and was creative director on the 2-day conference, Private Practice 2021, Surviving and Thriving in Uncertain Times. She's hosted and run workshops on private practice at 2 BACP student conferences. Through her extensive work in this area, Caz has helped hundreds of therapists with their private practices. Just, as I say, amazing. And from the point of view of people that subscribe to the channel, or lots of people that subscribe, I think it's going to be great to hear so much about a number of things here. I noticed it didn't mention trainee talk on there, or Therapist Create as well, which I think might be quite interesting to mention too on here. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Caz. It is lovely to have you here.
Oh, thank you. I'm really, really happy to be here. We were just saying, you know, kind of known you since the beginning of Therapist Connect, and yeah, it just feels really great to come on and chat with you today. So
brilliant.
Hello to the viewers.
What, sorry?
Hello to the viewers as well.
Yes, and I'm sure some people who subscribe and view probably know of you in various contexts as well. But perhaps we'll come on to Therapist Connect and trainee talk as well, potentially. But just to start, I mean, one of the main reasons for the conversation as well is your book coming out, Relational Ethics. I'm going to put this out on the day that it comes out, the 26th of November. So congratulations on the release of the book. Could you just perhaps talk us through a bit your journey to releasing the book, actually, what that was like, perhaps taking in, I imagine it comes from some of the work that you've done with BACP.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess for me, this is a bit of like the culmination of a lot of work that I've been doing over the last few years. I suppose what makes me a little bit different to some of the other private practice consultants, private practice experts, this kind of thing, is that I am not just interested, I am interested in marketing and growing practice and all of that, but I'm not just interested in that. I'm very, very interested in the ethics side of things. And crucially, as you said there in my bio, how you balance having an ethical private practice, which is very much focused on the therapeutic work, you know, the relationship, making sure that we can think about ethics and reflect on ethics in the well, all the time, basically, particularly because in private practice, you don't have anyone else to lean on. You don't have the kind of supportive scaffolding that others are going to have, you know, in organizations, or if you're a student and you're coming from placement, this is going to come as a big shock because basically the buck stops with you. Apart from, of course, our wonderful supervisors. That's why I think supervision is so important. So this is all very, very important. But also, people want to be able to grow their practices, have businesses. There's a bit of a difficulty in our profession with a lack of available jobs. So a lot of people, a very high percentage of people, go into private practice. In fact, the statistic that I put in the book is it's almost 70% of psychotherapists and counsellors that work in private practice, and I imagine that number is going to grow. So for me, it's been very important to really think about how do we, as private practitioners, you know, have successful businesses. And by the word successful, it's going to mean different things to different people, but kind of a sustainable long-term private practices, which where you can feel confident that you're kind of working ethically and your clients are safe. And I always felt this was in the best interest of everyone. I was kind of surprised that there hadn't really been that much work on this area. There hadn't been a lot of people looking at this, or really anyone looking at this. So the book did come from my work that I had done at the BACP. And when I went in to the private practice divisional executive as a volunteer at BACP, I proposed this something akin to the
okay. So you started by volunteering for them, and then over time saw there was the need, and suggested.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and drew up a business plan and everything, because it was very, very important for me. It was a part of me giving back, actually, at that point, to really do something for you know, on the ground therapists. You may have seen my slogans on, you know, working for on the ground therapists. And I really, really believe that a lot of people, for various reasons in our profession, don't get maybe the support that they need. And I saw this as an area, and I didn't think, like I say, I didn't think that was good for anyone. Not good for therapists, not good for clients, of course, but also not good for the profession. You know, we want to feel that people are out there working in the best way possible, representing our profession, doing as best as they can for clients. And of course, you know, a lot of trainings actually don't cover this. They don't cover private practice at all. Some do like a day or something like that. But for me, it's a real niche sector. I'm sure you agree, John Paul. It would be good to hear your thoughts. But yeah, it's a real niche sector. And people need a little bit of support. So if the training institutes aren't doing it, and the membership body at that point wasn't doing it, the main membership bodies weren't really supplying a lot. It felt really important that there was something of substance in particularly the biggest membership body, which is the BACP.
Totally, yeah, and I'm so glad you're doing it. I mean, from the point of view of the private practice, there was very little, I think, that was on my course. I will often say, gosh, it was 15 years ago that I studied. So I sort of hope in some ways that things have changed. And I don't know in detail what is on courses in lots of ways, actually. I don't think trauma was particularly mentioned when I studied. Of course, DEI, all those things. So things will have changed significantly, I think. But this was one of the ways which there was just very little. I remember it was a kind of back of a, well, this is a phrase, isn't it? Back of a fag packet, as far as a calculation of what I would need as far as an income in order to support myself. It wasn't talked about. So I've done a few videos on the channel about setting up a private practice, about finding clients, actually about income, those kind of things. I can see from the point of view of people coming into the profession that there isn't that much out there. So, and I'm so glad you're therefore, part of doing that and providing that for people. The other thing I suppose I would say, which I've often said about the career, picking up on a couple of things that you've said as well, in terms of how to do things ethically or contracts, what should be in contracts, cancellation, confidentiality. There are certain things which you would ask 100 therapists, I think, and most people would say ought to be in there. But there's a lot around ethics, even practically, whether you should have a contract or not, what should be in it or not, that there was a lot of kind of, I'm not sure, perhaps this person does it, that person does that. And I think it's a wonderful thing in the profession, isn't it, that we're able to be congruent and do the things that would work for us as well. But I also think, I'm not sure about the balance as well between taking care of ourselves and clients as far as something a bit more standardized as well. Because I noticed, I think it was put up on your social media recently about a contract, a sort of standard form contract. And it's so interesting, the kind of, I mean, I haven't looked at it, but I just think there is more of a need for that. I would be personally more in favor of something. Again, it's not that it's imposed on people, you have to do this, but some more kind of certainty or framework, I think is a helpful thing for people, particularly coming into the profession, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this is what makes me so interested in ethics, because it's almost like, and particularly when we look at it in private practice, what you're saying is so true, that if you take something like the contract, there are some things that absolutely have to be in there. Like they have to be in there for ethical reasons. There are other things that have to be in there for kind of legal reasons, like you might have GDPR in your contract if you don't have it in a separate privacy notice, for example. Whereas a lot of the rest of the contract will be about your practice, your individual practice. But the most important thing when it comes to ethics is how you think about it, how you actually engage with ethical thinking, and translate that into ethical practice. And this is what I'm really, really interested in. And you're right, I did do the contracting template. This is part of the toolkit. It took a long time to get that contract up, actually, because I think BACP felt a little bit nervous about putting something up and saying this is what needs to happen, because I guess there's something about who holds the responsibility in that. But I mean, my argument was, well, actually having somewhere to start. Of course, I mean, it's not always good for people to just copy completely, and that's one of the things that I try, and I've got a whole chapter on contracting in the book, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to make the case for, which is, sure, have your things. We all learn from each other as private practitioners, and that's a great thing. I talk a lot about the community of private practitioners, but also at the end of the day, we have individual practices. And this is how it's also linked to marketing and growing your practice, because my practice is different to your practice. And if you were down the road, John Paul, well, we don't have to be in complete competition with each other. Because actually we're going to have our own niches, we're going to have private practices in our own way. And so this kind of individuality and this uniqueness of both the therapist and the private practice is really, really important. Yeah.
Completely. I mean, I wouldn't see people around other therapists. I mean, there are 8 in the high street, actually. It's a village, Cobham. I wouldn't see them as competition. We would meet each other, talk about things. I guess in practice, we probably are, to the extent if somebody Googles therapist in Cobham, they will be comparing websites and prices and experience and those kind of things. But it's very much about a community and helping each other. I think that would be the primary thing that's come from other therapists locally. But just going back to ethics and the book, could you perhaps just take us through, you've mentioned a few bits, but what's covered in the book and the kind of things that you've wanted to focus on there?
Yeah. So the book is falling under this series, which is Ethics in Action series, published by Routledge. And so Yes, so it was important to focus this particular book on, areas where ethical dilemmas and ethical questions were going to come up, which means, I guess, things like tax, for example, just kind of briefly mentioned, and then I'm signposting people elsewhere because it's not so much. We're not going to have so much everyday ethical questions, if you like, about it. But most things in private practice, there are going to be many times when we need to think about the ethics around things. So so we've got 11 chapters, and it's kind of trying to get as much in there as possible. I mean, obviously, we've got the subtitle Solidarity, Compassion and Justice.
It's interesting. What's
Yeah,
that
well,
about?
this is kind of the three words. Well, they all can relate to client work. Even the word solidarity, I know that word has certain connotations for people, but look it up in the dictionary. And
Don't project onto it.
yeah, because actually, I mean, we do have a chapter on working with social awareness.
Okay.
And we use that term rather than the term social justice. We use social awareness because there's a lot of things to be aware of on a social level in terms of working with clients. So, for example, we can be in solidarity with the client's, cultural identity. And of course, if we're working with someone from the LGBTQ plus community, for example, we have to be mindful of that in our work. So we have to, we are changing how we might work, how we might think about that, things like that. So that's an example of how solidarity could come into that. But also those words relate to the private practitioner themselves. So again, if we take solidarity, so coming back to the community of private practitioners, I guess justice for me, it has. I mean, justice appears in the BACP ethical framework. It's obviously a very important word in client work. Sure. But also, I guess there's something for me, and this is how all my work in private practice ties together. Because sometimes people are a bit like, aren't you a bit like activists, like Caz? Like, why do you work in what's all this private practice business? And I'll tell you, it's because when people can't get jobs and they have to go and work in private practice, that becomes a social justice issue in itself. And that's why it's been so important for me to kind of, make sure people can earn a living. Money's a big thing in private practice. It's something that's obviously covered in the book under the social awareness chapter, because we have to consider how some people, I mean, I'm the same as you, John Paul. This was not my first career. I went to university and studied other things before I found myself in therapy. But I find that many more people these days, they are going into therapy, and the age demographic is a lot younger. And I think it's really important that if we are training people and saying that they can be qualified and registered and all of that kind of thing, that they can actually do what they've spent money training on, and actually be able to do that. But the other side of it is the ethical questions that come up around money, such as how can I pay my rent or my mortgage? I need so many clients, 15 clients a week or something, and how might that affect how I'm being with clients? How might it affect how I am on initial contact with clients, things like that. So this kind of thing would be a real interest around ethical dilemmas, particularly for the new private practitioners, I think, where there's slightly more pressure maybe to build their practices and all of that.
Absolutely, because I would get a lot of people come through the channel actually asking about coming into the profession. They're deciding whether or not to come in and choosing. And often a question is going to be about finances. Am I going to be able to afford it? Particularly if they're coming from a career which has had a pretty good, well, I say good income, something that's enabled them to survive and also have some fun in life and support families or whatever it might be. You know, it's going to be one of the most primary important things, isn't it, to know that they can continue to sustain that lifestyle. And why should that be very significantly compromised, really, I suppose. So it is a question I get asked quite a lot. Again, one of those things that I would talk about quite often, not because finances are necessarily something that would preoccupy me, but I can really see how important they are. I also think there's probably something a bit different about people coming into the profession compared to how things used to be, maybe, where it can be, you know, very much the primary income earners in the house who are looking to become therapists, rather than perhaps in the past, not to generalize, but it may have been people who there was a primary income earner, so they would and their partner would be able to study therapy. You know, perhaps it was a little bit more like that, but I think that's very much changing. But I think money's so important. Could you just say a bit more about that when you said about the finances when people are initially approaching?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We can do a little exercise on ethics. Just on your point, though, you're so right. I referenced a Sally Brown article from Therapy Today from a few years ago, where it was stated that, you know, kind of the people working, the therapists, qualified therapists, were mostly affluent white women in their 50s.
Right.
So there's a big change. That's a really good point that you're making. So in terms of where something might come up around money, so imagine that you're a new private practitioner and you're thinking, oh, you know, I want to build my private practice up, and you get somebody contacting you, and you kind of think, oh, I'm not really sure this is really within my competency levels. I'm not really sure I can work with this. Okay. So you kind of think, oh, but it's a client and I've got that inquiry. And, you know, it feels very exciting when you get your inquiries coming through. Now, competency is something that, you know, only you and your supervisor really are going to know your competency levels. Of course, you know, there's all kinds of talk of what competency you have when you qualify. Obviously, things like the scoped framework talks about competency. But when I talk about competency, it is very much being honest with yourself, you know, which we all have to do as therapists, and reflecting on conversations with your supervisor in terms of what you really can work with, what maybe you can't really work with, what you could work with, but maybe there's something from your past where if you work with it, something come up, you're not quite, I don't know, you're not quite there yet in terms of working through your own stuff. So so you might think, oh, get that initial, oh, I'm not sure. And then you end up saying yes, purely because you want to have a client. Okay, so this is an ethical thing. So if it resonates with anyone, you would want to pay attention to your initial gut reaction and then what's happened. Okay, that's not to say that every gut reaction we have is right, you know, but actually if we do have a gut reaction, we might do well to speak to our supervisor about it to kind of work through. Supervisor might say, oh, you know what, actually I think you are okay to take that client on, but you know what, if something's gone off, it might be that, you know, that could be problematic. Now, most complaints well, first of all, a lot of complaints will focus on stuff around boundaries, which is why the contract is so important. Movable boundaries, inconsistent boundaries, this kind of thing. There's a lot of complaints about private practitioners will be on that area. And the other area will be something like this. Well, two things around money. First of all, cancellation policy. That's been a big one. But this taking on someone who you can't really work with, then it getting a bit too far down the line. So you take them on, you have the initial session, you agree to work with that person, you don't have any kind of review point. You know, I mean, I don't know about you, but in my practice, I have a review point at session 6.
Yeah, I do in the contract. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
in the contract. So exactly the same as me. So, folks, if you're listening to this, it might be a good idea. Well, you know, because that gives a bit of a, you know, if you kind of think, oh, well, I've been made a bit of mistake, maybe I can kind of refer on and explain to the client. But think how rejected a client will feel if 13 sessions down the line you suddenly panic and think, I can't work with this client. I need to get out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So these are all ethical considerations, and they are the kinds of things that could potentially lead to complaints.
Yeah. And in the book, it's you sort of talk about them, give some examples, and then it's for people to think about, I guess, isn't it? Both with themselves, take it to supervision, peer supervision, that kind of thing. Because there is always that thing. There's not really an ethical issues necessarily a right or wrong answer. There will be about certain things. If you ask all therapists about relationships with clients, whatever it might be, I think all therapists would say that's an absolutely a no. But you know, as far as romantic sexual relationships, but a lot of the rest of it is very much for relationship, isn't it? Whether that's with supervisor, relationship with self. It's so I guess the book is more from that point of view. Is it's really important to think about it.
Yeah. We devised a model called the three-dimensional model, which is kind of something that people can use in that reflection. So we've packed the book with vignettes and lots and lots of different examples and stuff like that. So it really gives people, I guess, a flavour of some of the most common things that come up, some less common things as well that are things for people to kind of think about. They might think, oh goodness, I'd never thought about that before. So yeah, it is a bit, and there is a little bit of, yeah, this you have to do. Like, for example, there's a chapter on contracting. There's also a chapter on policies and procedures and like practice management, if you like. And for example, I did a little write up and example of a clinical will. Is obviously something that really you ought to have in your practice.
Yes.
A lot of people don't panic if you don't have one. I said this in the book, don't panic. Lots of people always say, oh, I better get a clinical will sorted and get someone to be my clinical executor, but don't get round to it. But it is kind of important, you know, if something happens to you, it's not to look after your practice. So there's little things like that where maybe it's a bit more directive, but a lot of it is around using different case studies, vignettes and things, and just having general conversations about everything. I mean, for me, it was about what is relevant to 21st century private practice. And so, you know, I mean, we've got a chapter. I always love, as you know, John Paul, I love working with the students. And so I've got a chapter dedicated just for students transitioning into private practice. But then I guess the rest of the book is filled with stuff for students. But the book is, it's for new private practitioners, but it's also for established private practitioners.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, some of the things you're talking about there are absolutely still things that are around for me now and, you know, over 10 years down the line kind of thing. It's,
And as you know, we did a chapter on social media because you make a little appearance in there.
Yes.
Which is great, you know, talking about, I mean, for example, this was something for me I didn't really know about, you know, being able to connect with clients worldwide and stuff through YouTube, because I don't use YouTube. Well, I've got a YouTube account, but I don't really use it as a means of reaching and connecting with potential clients. So like this is a very, I'm sure many people are going to be very interested in that. So I really loved that chapter in particular. I probably loved the contracting chapter. I loved a lot of it, to be honest, but I loved the supervision chapter. There's a supervision and other supportive systems chapter. And that was really, really good to write. I liked writing a chapter on endings as well, because that is one of the things I'm really, really interested in as a therapist. And then lastly, this social media chapter. It was because obviously because of some of my other work as well.
Endings. Could you say a bit about that? It's not really something I've covered on the channel. So that it's a particular interest of yours. It'd be great to hear something more about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm very happy to come and talk to you about it anytime. But
Gosh, that would be great.
yeah,
But yeah.
I mean, I guess because in terms of my specialisms, one of my specialisms is bereavement and loss.
Okay.
So I've got to think a lot about endings in general. And so actually being able to think about endings in private practice, again, it's very, very important, because what you can find is that in the same way as any type of loss, you can find that both the client and the therapist are having their own process. So particularly for those of us who do long-term work, maybe we've been working with a client for 6 years. That ending, it's like a big deal, not just for the client, it's a big deal for the therapists as well. And it's really important that attention is paid to the ending and that we give space to that. And so, yeah, I'll talk in that chapter a little bit about the things that we might consider in those ending sessions, why we might not want to go there ourselves, what might come up in me as a therapist in terms of my own stuff around endings. I mean, I don't know if you had this on your training all those years ago, but I certainly did. When you'd get to the end of term or whatever, you'd say, what do endings mean for you? The classic kind of training question, but it's so important. Actually, what do endings mean for me, and what do endings mean for my client?
Completely. And it's again, my contract would be something that talks about having some ending sessions, but it can get to a situation where there's an ending coming, or somebody says, I want to end. And then you talk about, well, maybe 3 or 4 sessions or even more to ending. And then somebody says, well, what are we going to do in them? And there is that kind of, okay. So I can see why therapists might potentially avoid the ending in some ways as well. There are reasons, perhaps financially or practically, why a client wants to end then or the next week. So it's a really significant issue. And it was actually from training that I could see something being done differently there about endings rather than anything being avoided. They made a big thing about an ending. So if any ending of a supervision group, or even at the end of the year, or certainly the end of the course, they did this lovely thing where at CCPE, at the end of the course, they did this thing they called it blooming. So you would sit in the group of 15 other people, and every single person in that group over the course of, we did it all with each other over the course of weeks, would feed back what had been experienced about that person over what everybody knew about them over the course of the course. And I think that's, of course, there's something about feeling safe in a group and all those kind of things that come from that. But there's also something very much about honoring an ending, isn't there? Doing something different, not the kind of, oh, it's over, let's just ignore that, not which might be often a human tendency, isn't it? But really honoring the ending and making it, and such a lot of things can come out of it. So I have to say, like, personally, I would be somebody who might avoid an ending a bit.
Like,
so I do have to really, I'll be reading that chapter of your book very closely. And it has been something over time that I've needed to put more attention into, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those reflections, really interesting reflections. And also, John Paul, it's great that you're aware that that's something within you. And I think, again, this would be something that I would be arguing in the book. If you're aware of these things, then they're less likely to leak, as we might say, into the work. And that's really, really important, because it gives that chance. I mean, we all know self-knowledge is power and all of that, but it gives that chance to reflect on things. And of course, we've got the added factor in private practice with endings, where you mentioned it there. Someone might be ending, for example, because they can't afford to pay for sessions. So that's an added thing that comes in private practice. And another thing is, what if somebody ends and they end abruptly, and you don't hear from them, and they owe you some kind of cancellation fee? How are you going to navigate that? So there's a few different things that come up specific to private practice as well.
You mentioned social awareness. Again, not something I've spent a huge amount of time on the channel, but there is a chapter on that, did you say, for you? You mentioned your activism as well, and those kind of things. I would say, since I've been in therapy, it would been in therapy, well, actually been in therapy as well, but been a therapist, it has been something which has come much more to the fore, I would say, within the therapy world. That more awareness, kind of the word social justice, the word political a bit more has sort of come into, maybe for some people, even 30, 40 years ago, it's be a word that would have been synonymous with therapy with them. But certainly my experience of training and also the sort of early stages of qualifying, it wasn't really around that much. But could you say a bit more about that? I do sometimes see certain things expressed on, say, Twitter, which make me feel, I don't know how to say it really, but slightly nervous in terms of, there is that phrase, isn't there, that sometimes when we're sort of fighting monsters, we don't want to become monsters ourselves. That's far too much of a strong word. I'm not calling anybody monstrous, but at all. But there is that there can be that tendency, can't there, if we feel very strongly about something, to in some ways dehumanize others, whichever way somebody's coming from. But I never feel that with you in terms of what you write and how you express things at all. Can you just say something about that, the kind of social awareness side of things?
Yeah. I'm glad you don't feel like that, because I guess for me, I mean, I would describe myself as a relational activist. So, it's actually keeping relationships at the heart of things and believing that we can make social change in the world by working with people as opposed to going into very opposing positions.
Right.
Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to agree with everybody.
Yeah.
For example, I've done a lot of work with the BACP, but I certainly do not agree with the BACP on a lot of things.
I've noticed.
However, when it comes to something important, you might be thinking, what can I do in this? How can I really put my argument forward? That kind of case of, don't raise your voice, improve your argument. And for me, I very much believe in seeing people, in people being seen. It is, you said the word dehumanizing there. I do find it very sad, actually, that I do see a lot of dehumanizing, and dehumanizing can happen in very overt ways, but it can happen in much more subtle ways as well. And I don't think they're any different, by the way, because something might be a very big violent act, but we might be interested in what's led to that. Who else has been involved in that? I guess, I mean, I agree with you. Therapy and politics, when we were training, it just would have been a no.
I don't think I heard the word in 5 years.
Yeah,
I mean, of course, politics was there the whole time, but I don't think anybody mentioned it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. If you kind of, I mean, actually, the analysts, some analysts have talked about it a lot historically, and various psychologists and things like that. But I think that I mean, I think training goes through waves, and I think that around that time, certainly we were at a time where it was like, if you were to bring politics into therapy, you're bringing your own stuff, your own opinions and things into space, and that's not what therapy is about. But what gets lost in that is this kind of human element, actually, which is very relational. As relational therapists, we absolutely have to respect the fact that yes, of course, we are working with kind of people's life experience. And in that sense, maybe some things in life experience, it doesn't really matter who you are, pain is pain. And we are there for our clients, whoever they are, to hear them and to understand them. But there are different layers of difficulties that people are going to bring. And actually, if you are a Black man, for example, coming into therapy, you're going to bring into the room all of the years of racism that you will have experienced. That's just a fact. And if you say something about, maybe, I don't know, example I use in the book is somebody saying something to a client in the workspace which is racist. And it's kind of the therapist listens and empathizes and then just stops and moves on to the next thing. And I've kind of made the point in the book, that's not technically incorrect. You know,
Sure.
they've done some useful interventions there, but it doesn't go far enough in terms
Sure.
of the cultural work that needs to be attended to there, because it doesn't touch on, well, hang on, what does this bring up for you as a Black man, you know? Because that is identity and part of who our clients are. So when I talk about seeing people, whether it's in community, whether it's other therapists, whether it's clients, this for me is the most humanizing thing, you know, and it's not always easy to do. And we always have, all of us have our unconscious biases, and that's a kind of thing that we have to be aware of and work with. Yeah.
The only slight discomfort I have around kind of trainings in it is that in some ways it says this is what everybody would experience if they are Black, potentially, or gay or trans. Whereas there is that listening to people's story, isn't there? People will also tell you what their experience of it has been. But I think the thing that has been very valuable for me personally about it is to do some of the trainings in things, is that it's exactly what you said in some ways, that if people will often tell a story which is saying something, isn't it? And they might do it in a sort of gentle way and it might sort of be pass. But if I've had some more awareness around it, done some more training in something, I'm much less likely, I think, for something just to pass without spending some time looking at it and thinking about it. So for me, I think that's the way in which trainings on you know, diversity and inclusion can be really helpful, because it's not always necessarily going to be presented in a way where someone says it's been a very significant issue for them. They've got used to being in environments where things have been problematic. It's really helped from that point of view, I would say, rather than something just you know, passing on by. It is really looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a good point about assumptions, and we have to be very, very careful to not kind of go, this is what I think a person always experiences if they're LGBTQ, for example, because then you are bringing your own stuff in. So it's almost like this delicate balance of
Totally,
you know, making sure that you're doing the work and all of that. You're aware of what might come up. You're ready to listen, you know, keeping that space open, you know, and maybe sometimes just, oh, I'm going to just nudge a little bit more because maybe they feel like they might feel shame. They might not want to. I use a case study in the book of a guy who is, well, we assume he may be gay, but it's not clear cut. And actually it's explained that he would have a great deal of shame actually saying those words himself in session. So it might become very important for a therapist to read between the lines and just try and you know.
Really interesting. Just on that, I added, I didn't used to ask questions. I have a particular format for asking questions when clients come in, and I more recently added any issues around sex and sexuality. But actually, I don't ask it anymore, because there can be potentially, unless somebody's explicitly coming with that, to ask somebody within 20 minutes of meeting them at a first session, I just don't think it's a brilliant idea, because somebody might immediately say no. And then they're left having said no, and it might make it more difficult 6 months, a year down the line to say something on the basis of, not that anybody should, of course, feel like that, but there can be shame around it, can't there? Which limits, at least in the early stages, when they need to feel safe first, somebody's ability to talk about it. So yeah, I think it's that's a really interesting. Can we just move on a little bit to the kind of trainee work, trainee talk, and that kind of thing? Also, therapists create as well. Are you still doing that? Because
yes, I am. Yes.
Can you just say a bit about those? Yeah. And perhaps therapists connect too, actually, for the benefit of anybody who hasn't heard about it.
So well, the pandemic was an interesting time, wasn't it? Yes. I mean, very interesting for private practitioners. And I guess for me, I was at the time 20, beginning of 20 or 2019, really. I was on Twitter. I was becoming, I suppose, a bit more well known because of this work that I was doing on the toolkit, and also because of some of my activism work as well. And I've just always loved working with students. You know, I've done quite a bit of teaching and facilitating, and lecturing, supervising students as well. And so I had kind of put out a few things on Twitter, trying to get students together and things like that, or just being interested in students' thoughts around things. And then my colleague at Therapist Connect, Dr. Peter Blundell, put out the first Therapist Connect tweet, which was very much about connecting therapists. And it became apparent. I mean, I think it's because of the timing. He did it slightly before the pandemic started, but only just. And of course, the timing of all of that was, it proved to be that it was very, very much needed. Therapists wanted to connect with each other. Now, at that time, I'd written to Peter and I'd said, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to do this project trainee talk. Would you retweet for me?" Because I was like, "Oh, well, he's got this thing going. It would be really good to get him to put it out so that people see it." And then he kind of said to me, "Oh, well, how about you bring that into Therapist Connect and we do it together." So that was like 2 months after he'd sent that initial tweet. And so, yeah, so I kind of started the project, but we were, and I'm sure you remember, John Paul, we were really running that. We dedicated a lot of free time, but with the trainee talk, we used to go on every Monday and put a series of questions and have a kind of a theme. And it just really grew. We became very well known for it. So it was nice because we kind of had, Peter had started Therapist Connect, I'd started Trainee Talk, and everybody really wanted to connect together. I have very fond memories of that time. Although 2020 for me personally was an incredibly difficult year, I also have very, very fond memories because it really was about getting to know other therapists, everybody just coming together, having a bit of a laugh as well as sharing best practice. I suppose for Trainee Talk, I'm a bit, I'm obviously very interested in ethics. Peter's PhD was in boundaries. So that's what I think enabled us to be confident that we could run something like that on a social media platform. And don't get me wrong, there were obviously lots of considerations in terms of running a social media platform in general, and particularly running a student project. Because well, I'm not going to go into all the numerous things. We did actually present at an academic conference in 2021, and we talked a little bit about this because there's obviously particularly on Twitter, a real lack of confidentiality. There's a question over how you can hold students properly, which is very, very important. But I think that we kind of, we were quite a good team with that, really, because I had all of my background and then also my expertise in private practice, where students might be thinking of going into private practice. Peter works at Liverpool John Moores University. So it just, it's really kind of nice times, and we're still running it. We've done kind of live trainee talks, so met up online, and we've done some recordings as well. We've got at the moment we do it in a slightly different way, so we just throw out one ethical dilemma. I don't quite have time to sit around doing all the questions and things anymore, but
I see. So you give an ethical dilemma, and then you would talk about that on a. Do you do it as a podcast, or did you say live now?
That's on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. So we've kind of spread on social media. So there's still a nice way for students to meet each other. albeit just kind of focusing on one question and being able to give a little bit of thought around that, which, given everything I've said about ethics, it feels personally like a real thing, that I suppose, that has been given, because it allows a bit of modeling as well, because it's not like we're always going to say to the students, I mean, we want to kind of support the students and be encouraging to them, but also sometimes we might have to say, oh, but how about this as well, so actually a little bit of actual teaching, just to get people to really think about things rather than kind of writing it and going, can I have my A star now, or whatever. So that was trainee talk. And obviously, the evolution of Therapist Connect community, I suppose, as it's changed. We've gone from being a very much pandemic based platform, which I guess for private practitioners was really useful, because private practitioners in particular were in even more isolation. We're already in isolation, but we were in even more isolation
completely
in the pandemic. But we've moved on a lot from that now, and one of the projects that I run is Therapists Create, that you mentioned, and I am so this is the third thing of mine that is very important. We've mentioned the private practice stuff, we've mentioned activism, creativity is the next thing. So I am a creative person. I have a background in creative arts, and I absolutely love running that project. And actually, I mean, we've done different things. We've done kind of like, for example, poetry. We did a spoken word poetry session. We've done some other things like that. We've done full-on showcases on Instagram. And then we've done kind of more ad hoc, like, here's a theme, winter, for example, tag us in, message us, we'll put it on our stories, and then we'll pick a couple to put on our wall. I'm looking at some other things that we're going to be doing in the future. Now that once this book's out and stuff, I've got some other projects that I'm working on.
Fill your time, yeah,
that's right. But I actually put out a call for volunteers to help, because we used to have loads and loads of volunteers in Therapists Connect. It was wonderful, and we don't put a lot on our volunteers, because obviously we don't want people working for free, huge amounts, but it has given people an opportunity to work within a community platform, doing whatever they might be interested in doing. So we used to have a hell of a lot of volunteers, and that's kind of gone down over the years. But I just put out a little note the other day just saying, oh, would people be interested? And I've had about 7 people come back to me, actually.
Fantastic.
So which actually, if I do get a little bit of help, so I was just saying to you before, I am very busy, and I'm trying to kind of manage that at the moment, then that would be wonderful, because we could really do some lovely things. And of course, that's a thing for therapists to be able to explore their own creativity.
Absolutely, Well, I mean, anybody listening, if they want to volunteer, I'll put links to Therapists Connect, Trainee Talk as well, and also Therapists Create, links to those, so people can get in touch, follow on social media, but also actively play a role if that's what they want to do. I mean, creativity is just, it's being, I suppose, a therapist. As time's gone on, I've just seen the importance of it so much more. I've just done a few conversations recently with art in therapy, actually, and also music in therapy. So there's so many different ways. The woman I was talking to, her name's Nellie, and she was talking about the different ways that people can be creative as well, isn't it? I see your photography and that kind of thing on social media. There's so many different ways that somebody can, whether that's writing, art, music, gardening. There was a guy who came on and talked about nature and gardening. That's the wonderful thing about it. But I just think it's so important for psychological well-being, isn't it? It's very connecting to other people, very connecting to ourselves. I remember somebody saying as well, I did a talk with somebody about narcissism and overcoming narcissism, or those kind of traits, empathy being one of those, encouraging empathy being one of those qualities. And it was talking about how important creativity can be for really growing empathy within somebody, because it's very connecting to other people. It's often an emotional experience, isn't it? Whatever we create, and it's connecting to other people. So I can really see it from that point of view as well. I'm creativity for me in some ways would come in through the channel and those kind of things. So I think there are lots of different ways that people can do it, aren't there? But so important that it's there. And
yeah, well, I'll definitely try and catch some of those episodes. Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, yeah, like it was something I really emphasize with therapists create, you know, is it cookery? Is it knitting? You know, anything. And also not just people who would already consider themselves to be creative, but people who have never explored this, because as you said there, to be able to explore in a not pressurized way. Sometimes I say if you want it anonymous, and I can put something up and it can be anonymous if that takes the pressure away. You know, and it's great. I mean, you mentioned my photography there, and I love putting my photography out for people. Sometimes I put my poetry out for people, but there's other things like music, for example. Music would have been one of the first things that I did from a child, and I play a lot of musical instruments.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's something that I keep more for myself, though. Sometimes the odd photo of a guitar might enter into something, but it's really nice for me as well to kind of think, these are the things that I want to share. These are the things that I keep more for myself now. You know, and maybe there might be development in anything, but yeah, I mean, I feel like my energy change even when we talk about this.
About it completely. Yeah.
So at home with all of this stuff.
So almost sort of coming to time or running out of time in some ways. But I would often ask people at the end of a conversation about you know, like the most important things they've learnt in life in some ways, or a really important thing. And I'm always aware landing that on somebody at the last minute is, but most often therapists will have an answer. So I can, the thing as well, I was just wondering if you have any advice for people coming into the profession, in your experience of working with trainees, or anything you would say to people who were thinking about coming into the profession and perhaps in their training as well.
Yeah. I would say do your research on courses and things like that, and make sure that you're kind of aware, maybe give a bit of a read up on what's happening in the profession, so you're aware of what your course is and where you might find yourself when you qualify, but also, you know, really think about well, I'd say that I did integrative training, and I don't know, maybe I just kind of fell into it, but, you know, be aware of what it is that really makes a difference to you as a person. So when you were saying there, what would you say in terms of like wisdom from your own life? I mean, I have so many things, but I have a background, you know, studying philosophy and religious studies, and you know, so actually these are things that I can bring into the room as well. So yeah, maybe think about how am I as a holistic person, you know, what do I have to offer, what life experience do I have, but what do I know about yeah, myself in terms of other things and what it means to be a human being. And I think that's a rolling question. What on earth does it mean to be a human being? You know,
and it can change over time as well, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that we really need to be clued into that. Here I am on this earth. Why am I here? What matters to me? What makes me me? What makes me human? Or maybe I feel that I'm interconnected with nature, something that I feel actually.
Me too.
So how does that, how do I make sense of that? And how might that even be useful within the room as well, you know, without putting my stuff on the client, but, you know, just in terms of being able to think together. Yeah. It's a wonderful profession, because we don't be right. This is my advice. Sorry, it's taken don't be someone who just goes and does your qualification and goes, oh lovely, I've got a master's in psychotherapy, And now I just work and I don't ever think about anything. And, you know, I just do my 30 hours of CPD that I have to do to get it ticked off. And I only listen to what my supervisor says. Be a creative person, be a creative therapist, be a living human being, you know, be a human being in the room. As a therapist.
Yes, I mean, I remember a therapist saying to me about living a vivid life. You know, living a vivid life. That's what, in some ways, what we help. What the therapeutic relationship can really help people to do, but it's living that yourself, I think, is important, isn't it? I always wondered on the course. I used to think, gosh, this is a lot about me. What about if somebody comes in having anxiety or depression? What do I do, kind of thing? But I can really see why it's very much geared towards your own internal masculine or feminine, or whatever it might be, your own life crisis or spirituality or whatever, because it might look different. Well, it will look, everybody's unique, aren't they? So how that manifests in the other person, a vivid life, if you're looking at it from that point of view, is going to be different for different people. But if you're doing that, I think that's one of the most helpful things that you can do from your client's point of view, let alone from your own point of view, I think. So, yeah. Gosh, we are unfortunately about at time, but it's just been amazing, Caz. Thank you so much. And this will go up, as I say, on the day that your book comes out. So everybody do go and have a look for Caz's book and buy it. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's been brilliant. I mean, there's another. I'm sure we could go on and talk about pretty much everything you've talked about. Could have its own podcast, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and how generous you've been in what you've talked about and giving your time as well. So thank you.
And thank you for all your work as well, John.
Oh, it's okay. That's okay.
Because I know you're very interested in connection. I always love the people that really think about what the word connection actually means. So thank you for having me on.
Brilliant. Thank you. You take care. Bye-bye. Bye.